Pakistan has a very poor history of elections. And when we look back to history, apart from one or two elections, none has been credible enough. When we had this vote of no confidence in April 2022, then we had to wait 16 months, which was neither here nor there, for any party anywhere in the world to govern, and that to the last 16 months of a 5-year tenure. Pakistan has to go into a new IMF program because the current one ends in March. And obviously, whichever party forms the government ultimately has to start negotiating with IMF from the first day onwards for a bigger, uh, longer. This one was 9 months. So obviously, we are not talking about 9 months. We are talking about 3 years or something like that. And maybe 6, 8 billion, or someone is also talking about 10, $12 billion to give them the safety network so that they
Yeah.
can then focus on other things. Whether the IMF agreement will be done in the shortest possible time or not, that is a question, because for me, as I expect that, as you would agree, that the IMF program will be very, very tough.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Wave Global. My name is Nauraiz Rana, and I'm an economist with the World Bank. In today's program, we'll be going over Pakistan's political economy landscape, especially considering that the elections have recently been held, and we have the outcome and the results in front of us. And in order to join me for the discussion, I have a very privileged guest. I'm very honored to introduce Mr. Zubair Umar, who has served as the former governor of Sindh and also as the Minister of Privatization. Mr. Zubair Umar brings with him years of experience in governance as well as economic reforms, and we look forward to hearing what his ideas and what his insights are on the current evolving landscape in Pakistan. So thank you so much for joining us, Zubair Umar Saab.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us. Just for the introduction and for your viewers, thanks for the good introduction. My obviously career has been with IBM. So for an American audience, I think that's also very important. 26 years I spent with IBM.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I would like to add that your induction as the Minister of Privatization was very appropriate and much needed because, you've served in the private sector, you've helped build up IBM, and, that itself speaks a lot. And therefore,
Yeah.
we needed that expertise, and those technocratic technical capabilities. So likewise, I said your appointment was quite appropriate. And going forward, I think we would be needing a lot of guidance from you as well, and especially for the course of this program we really want to hear what your ideas are as how Pakistan comes out of this election cycle and tries to integrate better economic reforms. So before we begin, and I turn to you, I just want to quickly set the stage for our discussion. The last 1.5 year, the previous 1.5 year leading up to the elections were quite turbulent, to say so. We witnessed the events of May 9th. Before that, there was a vote of no confidence that ousted the former Prime Minister Imran Khan. And on the economic front, our GDP contracted, going as low as less as 0.6%. There were, the levels of inflation that we incurred were at its record highest. And given all that, there was a lot to look forward to for these elections that happened, because the idea was that they would bring the needed political stability and they would help elect an autonomously governed government, which would have the mandate as well as the confidence from the masses to make the right set of economic decisions. But what was seen that leading up to the elections again, one party was favored more than others by the power brokers. And we know who those power brokers are. I don't need to lay that out. And so there was these concerns that were being raised even prior to the elections about the legitimacy and the authenticity of the elections. And then the elections happened, the events, the day of the event, there was some turbulence in terms of network disruptions. Then overnight, the live telecast of the results was again disrupted. No one knew what was happening. And then suddenly there were concerns, discrepancies being raised about Form 45 versus the actual winners that were announced by the Election Commission of Pakistan. So, in given this entire picture, I don't just want to talk about in isolation the day of the election, but everything leading up to the day of the election has further, I think, created more of an unstable environment rather than what was needed and desired. How do you view that, going forward? do you think we will be able to, achieve that level of political stability that the country so badly needs?
I mean, the straight answer to your question is unfortunately that's not the case. I mean, I don't think so. We are near any kind of political stability which can lead towards the economic revival. If at any time in our history we needed a credible electoral process, this was it. Not that we didn't need it in the past. Pakistan has a very poor history of elections and obviously marred by allegations of serious electoral malpractices, allegations, and all of those things. And when we look back to history, apart from one or two elections, none has been credible enough. But this time, I think based on what was expected in terms of the country has waited almost 2 years, I mean, has been wasted as such because Pakistan needed an election and a party coming into power to undertake serious economic reforms over the 5 year period that it would get. When we had this vote of no confidence in April 2022, then we had to wait 16 months, which was neither here nor there, for any party anywhere in the world to govern, and that to the last 16 months of a 5 year tenure. And then the 6 month period for a caretaker setup, which obviously is not going to undertake any major reforms. So everyone was looking towards the February 8th elections and hoping that to some extent, reasonable extent, it would be free, fair, and transparent. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. And the performance of the Election Commission has been so poor that no one is appreciating, not even those who are winners or those who are losers. The largest single party that has emerged is the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf of Imran Khan, who was really in the most difficult situation to fight in an electoral battle of the size that any political party has to muster the support of the people. It has to campaign all over the country. They did not have any major political leader to go around the country to campaign, especially the post-May 9th. You mentioned May 9th. The post-May 9th was a bitter reality for Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. I'm not going to go into the rights and wrongs of May 9, but the reality is that there was this fear factor that would not even allow 25 to 50 people in a major city like Karachi for the PTI supporters to come out. That was the level of fear before the elections. And you can imagine everyone thought that elections have to be managed if you have a very strong organization that is campaigning day and night and they have major political leaders who are going around the country and campaigning. There was no such thing. So on the evening of February 8th, it was a total surprise. For some, a pleasant surprise, obviously, those supporting PTI, but a hard reality to digest the opponents that as the numbers started coming in, PTI was leading in most constituencies of KP and Punjab obviously where it matters the most. And that is when the results stopped coming in most cases after 4, 5, 6 hours of counting. And the whole nation obviously was very surprised, not surprised looking at the bitter history, because we saw the same kind of manner in which the election results were announced in 2018 when the famous RTS, which was the IT system developed to communicate the election results, suddenly went down. And there was no good IT expert within the election commission to fix it within, as they said. And so such was the poor management in 2018. So Pakistan is known for a very poor way, whether it was deliberate then in 2018 or whether this was deliberate in 2024. I think the reality is that it did not allow for people across the length and breadth of Pakistan to see the election results as free and fair. For many people, the results were changed overnight. In the morning, people started to watch in disbelief quite from the constituencies where they thought that the PTI candidates have won. And suddenly the results showed that actually They have lost by huge, wide margins of 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 votes in most cases. So this is where Pakistan is right now in terms of the election results still being disputed, challenged in every court, in the election commission, in the Supreme Court. There has been a petition today asking the Supreme Court to announce to annul the elections at totally and order fresh elections in 1 month's time. That's obviously easy said than done. So we don't even know. And just to add to this confusion, the party which obviously had the numbers with the support of the allies, Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, it was not the largest party, but Pakistan People's Party, which is the third largest party, has obviously announced to support the candidate of Mr. Shehbaz Sharif as the Prime Minister. And the Muttahida Qawmi Movement, MQM, also has announced to support, which will allow simple majority in favor of Mr. Shehbaz Sharif. But today, there are obviously a lot of people within the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz who are questioning the wisdom of forming the government and are advising that we should rather sit in the opposition.
Actually, you raised some very excellent points, and there are a bunch of ones that I would like to extrapolate and kind of zoom more into. You mentioned May 9th, and I completely agree. I think uh, it's May 9th is often leveraged by obviously the military establishment as well as those who oppose Imran Khan as the crux and the downfall of that regime. But the truth is that we often tend to not talk about the underlying factors that led to May 9th happening. There's this level of distrust in the institutions of the country. There's this, this economic turmoil that people had been grappling with, that there was so much frustration that led to those various factors culminating into the events of May 9th. And what we were hoping for is that these elections would help bridge those gaps, would help heal the country, and then move forward to a more positive trajectory and towards an upward outlook. Anyhow, that really did not happen. And then you also mentioned the RTS, and you talked about the ECP's mismanagement. And I want to second that. Whether that's lack of technical ability, whether this is mismanagement, or there's deliberately maneuvering of the elections. In any case, it tends to lose the credibility that elections govern and the elections are meant to hold. And that's what we've been seeing, that there's a lot of hostility now that's been growing even further among the masses who feel that their mandate has been stolen. But despite all that, one question I wanted to put forth for you is that we knew that the election was skewed in favor, or the environment was being created in such a manner that implicitly favored one party. And then the results that we see, despite all that, are you surprised by those results that, the independents backed by PTI, who uh, who fought the elections without the party leadership, without a central board, without its electoral symbol, despite all that, they were able to gain so many seats. How did you view that result?
Uh, February 8th, the elections took place. February 9th, around the afternoon, I tweeted. This was my first tweet after the elections. It has started by saying, not surprised at all with what was happening. I mean, obviously, the results were still coming in. And at that point in time, PTI backed independents were leading in KP. Obviously, they were sweeping KP. They were leading in Punjab, and they were leading in the National Assembly. So not surprised at all. I thought that they have everyone agreed that they had the support. The only question was whether they can convert that support into votes. And
Hmm.
I think we have to give them the credit that they were always known as a party which was strongest in the social media. And they used that social media to their advantage in a manner that they reached even those segments of the population which are not so educated. I mean, Pakistan's electoral process obviously is urban centers, and then you have rural centers, and it's obviously very, very difficult to expect that they would go through the social media to comprehend, because don't forget that PTI-backed candidates had the same symbol badge with which everyone was familiar for years, and suddenly that was taken. So every candidate was going into with a new uh, uh, with a different symbol, and that symbol obviously meant that this would be difficult for uh, those candidates, so those voters, to go and identify on the ballot paper to pick up the
Yeah.
right choice. And I think they did. So from that standpoint, they had the support. I never thought, I had no doubt about that. In Pakistan, the point is that any party or any political leader which is considered to be on the receiving end, which has been the case all through our history, is certainly becomes the most popular leader, starting with Mujibur Rahman before the breakup of Pakistan, to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and then to Benazir Bhutto, and then to uh, uh, Nawaz Sharif. Not one, not twice, but three times he was ousted by the military-backed whatever. I mean, sometimes the judiciary was used, sometimes direct military intervention, and the first time the Kakar formula. And each time he was able to come back stronger than ever, simply because he was considered to be the one who had been undone and therefore needed the backing of the people. This time it was Imran Khan's. Uh, Basically, the thing went in favor of Imran Khan. Not to give them the credit for the fight back. Obviously, it was not just about that they were believed that they have been on the receiving end, and this is the only way. By the way, you mentioned May 9th. This was the only way to come over and put the May 9th behind them. And the way they have done, and certainly on the mainstream television networks, you see the PTI leaders and some of the anchors, talk show hosts who are supportive of PTI, certainly becoming more stronger in their views and talking things without fearing a backlash from anyone.
Actually, no, absolutely. I cannot agree more. Very valid point. And especially you took us back to 1971 and you shared the analogy, comparing Mujibur Rahman and the events that followed. There was military intervention back then as well. There's one key similarity that was one incident in Pakistan's history back then when a party which had the majority of votes was unable to form a government. And now in 2024, we also see something similar. It's not the same intensity, but we see that a party which had the maximum number of seats among the top three is being unable to form a government, and PMLN, which has the second largest seats, and People's Party, which has the third largest seats, are forming sort of a coalition to form a minority government. And we've barely witnessed that happen other than the events of
Yeah,
1971.
but just
So
just one correction here. Just one
yeah,
correction here as far as PTI being unable to form the government. I mean, some of it is obviously also to do with the PTI's political decision making. I mean, they have said that they will not ask PPP or PMLN, or they will not even talk to them. So if they don't talk to them, and based on the current numbers, I
yeah,
mean, they can become better. I mean, they can even have a simple majority on their own. That would be a different case. But
yeah, no, no,
today,
yeah.
if you ask them, they are reaching out to smaller parties. They have reached out yesterday to JUIF, which has just about 3 or 4 seats in the National Assembly, which is not enough to give them the strength for the simple majority. So, I mean, that is the difference. The Awami League of Mujibur Rahman obviously had a simple majority on their own,
Yeah.
although all of those seats had come from East Pakistan. And the sensitivity, I'm not saying that today we do not have the kind of sensitivity, but then the sensitivity was about the integrity of the country, that if you don't let Awami League or Mujibur Rahman and you don't give them the power, I mean, you could obviously everyone thought that you would lead this up to the breakup of the country. That's exactly what happened.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And of course, there were other multiple factors. There were marginalization. They weren't given their due share. The
Yeah.
economic allocation of resources was not fair or partial at all back then. But and I agree with the simple Moji part as well. But what I wanted to focus was that the parties that are now forming the government, they do not have the majority mandate. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's not the PTI does not have simple majority, but still, in terms of who has the highest number of seats and who
Of
has,
course.
the second highest and the third highest in terms of that. What it begs is the important question that for such a government, a coalition government, a coalitions tend to work better when there's an overlap of manifesto or objectives. Now, People's Party is more akin to being a socialist party. You know, their manifestos, their objectives, their goals tend to be different than those of PMLN, which focuses more on, you know, business-oriented communities, trading activities. There's a difference in their economic output and how they tend to perceive things. So the very first question would be, do you think such a coalition is possible or sustainable in the long term? That's one. The second question that I wanted to ask is closely related, is that the IMF program, the 3 billion program, is coming to an end. We would most likely be going into another IMF program. We'll be going for another additional loan of maybe $6 to $8 billion. Our foreign reserves, again, they've started to dwindle. They're down to $8 billion, which covers only 1 month of import cover. And in doing so, some tough and key decisions need to be made, including raising the prices of commodities, of basic utilities, fuel, petrol, energy. And in doing so, whichever party is at the helm of affairs risks losing the support of the masses. And in this case, they already do not have the support of the masses. So political stability tends to drive or convert into economic stability. And here we're already initiating on a very turbulent ground. What are the
Actually,
challenges that you vision?
I think
How?
the challenges could not have been tougher ever in terms of economic challenges. You obviously mentioned Pakistan has to go into a new IMF program because the current one ends in March. And obviously, whichever party forms the government ultimately has to start negotiating with IMF from the first day onwards for a bigger, longer. This one was 9 months. So obviously, we are not talking about 9 months. We are talking about 3 years or something like that. And maybe 6 to 8 billion, or someone is also talking about $10 to $12 billion to give them the safety network so that they can then focus on other things. Whether the IMF agreement will be done in the shortest possible time or not, that is a question, because for me, as I expect that, as you would agree, that the IMF program will be very, very tough. And as a Pakistani who wishes Pakistan to come out of the economic situation on a sustainable basis, I would wish IMF imposes the kind of conditions that finally, formally fixes Pakistan's economic issues for once and for all, because this is no good that every time you go back to every new government comes and the first thing it has to do is to go back to the IMF for negotiating some kind of a help without having fixed, for whatever reason, we went to IMF earlier. So within this century, if you see in 2002, when the PMLQ came into power, the first thing they did under Shaukat Aziz, who was then the finance minister initially, then the prime minister, we went to IMF. 2008, PPP under Shaukat Tareen, they went to IMF immediately. 2013, Ishaq Dar came and we went to IMF. 2018, Asad Umar was the finance minister, and we ended up with IMF immediately. 2022, through the vote of no confidence, when the PML-led coalition came, the first thing they do is to go back to IMF, and now again the same situation. So, for anyone looking at Pakistan, I think this is not a sustainable situation, and everyone expects that IMF is some kind of a one-time solution during which time you fix your economy, whether you're talking about taxation system or energy sector or public sector enterprises and other sectors, formally take those tough decisions, introduce those critical reforms that put Pakistan on the path of sustainable economic development over a long period of time. So that is it. The other question that you had was whether PMLN and PUP will be able to agree on most things, having different economic agendas over the long term. You said over the long term. I see that serious challenge within the shortest possible time. This IMF thing is obviously the first thing that if PMLN is able to form the minority government, if it goes ahead with forming, and PUP having just given the vote of confidence to the Prime Minister, obviously they will have the right to object, to create, challenge the terms and conditions that PMLN would agree with IMF. And then following that, in the first week of June, which is just less than just about 3 months from now, we will have the budget, which if we had agreed with the IMF agreement, would be IMF mandated budget with full stop and comma. Obviously, not you do not have the space to have your own uh, whatever you want to do. So that will be tough with higher taxes and everything, with increase in utility prices, increase in petrol prices, doing away with whatever subsidies remain, and all of those things, which will obviously will be unpopular decisions and will further erode the popularity of the party uh, in power, which will be PMLN if it goes ahead with taking over the reins. So it's a very tough road ahead, and it will require a lot of media management and convincing those segments of the population, the middle class, the urban middle class, for example, the business community, because obviously they will be suffering. I mean, the costs would go up, the taxes would go up, and the will obviously also suffer. They are the biggest sufferers eventually. So yes, that this 2 year or 3 years is going to be a very difficult period. Whether it will be able to sustain that from a eroding of the popularity or not has to be seen.
So from it, what it seems is that it's nowhere in future are we looking for a more political stable environment where parties will be working in tandem to achieve a common goal. And it's like you said that not even in, let alone the long term, even in the short term, you do not foresee that People's Party and PMLN would be able to work together to achieve those goals. And I think that would be that would only add to the aggravate the problem and highlight the challenges that we're already currently facing. And on that note, actually, very closely related to it, I have a question. And I think it was Einstein who said that. So it's not me. I'm just quoting him. He said that it's sheer stupidity to expect a different outcome by trying the same, with the same input again and again. And in this case, what it hasn't been finalized yet, but there's a possibility that Ishaq Dar may again be appointed as a finance minister of Pakistan. And he previously has held this position about four, 5 different times. And every other time, we've only seen an increase in external debt. We've only seen a currency crisis manifesting, the DARPEG, which collapsed recently in 2022. We saw the price of PKR in response to the dollar go from 224 to almost 300. How do you envision anything different this time around, or this should be a red line? Like we should try something else. It's high time that we infuse someone with more better technical capabilities. And given that you
Actually,
worked with them, you were part of the PMLN administration.
I have worked with Mr. Dar for many years uh, as privatization minister, initially as Board of Investment chairman, and obviously even when I was Governor of Sindh, because Governor of Sindh had the additional responsibility, because Karachi being the financial hub, one of the important things was to ensure that the governor has a direct license with the business community here, whether we're talking about multinationals, stock market people, a business community, and others, and have a kind of relationship with Islamabad, so that when the policy is being framed, you as governor are able to convey the expectations of the people who are going to implement that policy. So that input was extremely important. What the business community want, whatever sector it was, fertilizer or banking or whatever. So I worked with him all through those years. Um, I think, let me tell you the good aspect of the PMLN in terms of finance ministers when compared with the two other leading political parties, PTI and PVP. Um, uh, uh, when you go to the people, it's all about economic agenda. Uh, Unfortunately, both PVP and PTI never had their own people uh, becoming finance ministers. Asad became a finance minister only for a few months before he was replaced by Mr. Hafiz Sheikh. Now,
Yeah.
someone has made a plan which reflects a party philosophy, okay, and then someone else becomes the finance minister who has no commitment to that economic plan. That happened during the PVP government. If you look at go back to 2008 to 2013, Shaukat Tareen and then Hafiz Sheikh, and it happened the same. The sequence was different. This time, Hafiz Sheikh became the finance minister and then was replaced by Shaukat Tareen. Both had no commitment. Both had nothing to do with the philosophy of PTI, where Imran Khan wanted to create a new Pakistan after dismantling the old Pakistan. It was all about the economic solution for the people of Pakistan. So Asad Umar was almost socialist. He was not in favor of privatization. He had this concept of, I think, Sarmaya Pakistan to fix the state organizations. And Hafiz Sheikh, the first act he did after becoming the finance minister was to dismantle that Sarmaya Pakistan concept. And so the philosophy was completely different. And if you go back to even 1971, when PDP came first time in power, or during the time Benazir Shaheed was prime minister, they borrowed the finance ministers either from the World Bank or IMF or someone from outside, not a party guy, which was obviously a contradiction in itself. People did not realize then, but that was a major flaw why those commitments could not be delivered. As far as PMLN always had the facility of first time, it was Sartaj Aziz, who was brilliant and who initiated those major reforms back in 1990, which were, I think, which obviously for me was probably the best period as far as any government was concerned. Breathtaking pace, and as someone working with a multinational, we saw very closely how the decisions were taken and how every major reform was initiated. In fact, the privatization process, the privatization commission was set up in 1990 within 2 months after the taking over. So whether Mr. Ishaq, and we had others also at this time, Mr. Ismail obviously would have been a good choice had he not lost favor with the party leadership. Khurram Dastagir has a good understanding of finance and economy. He has unfortunately lost the election, so he's no more a possible candidate. There are a few young guys, but they're too young. In fact, all the young guys who are very, very good, and I've worked with them in the economic advisory cell that we have. Ali Parvez, Ihsan is another guy from Faisalabad. Both did not contest because they did not get the tickets. So that leaves possibly on the Mr. Ishaq Dar to lead the show from the Q block.
Do you think there was some sort of deliberation in eliminating competition from Mr. Ishaq Dar on a lighter note, so that
some people, Mr. Raza Rumi, I think tweeted a month ago that all the economy-related leaders have been sidelined. That includes also Daniel Aziz, because I've worked very closely with him. He's got very, very strong insight into economy, very well educated from US Ivy League University, and has worked quite a lot during the Musharraf government. He was a key minister. And there are a few others. So I don't know whether it is deliberate or not. But what I've heard is that even if Mr. Ishaq Dar is given the finance ministry, there are possibly talks going on with some 2 or 3 possible people from the private sector to come and join. And so at least you have some counterweight to Mr. Ishaq Dar's logic of doing whatever he wants to do with running the economy. And the names that I've heard are some credible names. But personally, I don't think so. But unless they are given the finance ministry, it won't help. Because I can tell you in 2013, because I saw that happening in front of me, Shaukat Tareen was initially brought as an advisor or a special assistant to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, while Mr. Ishaq Dar was the finance minister. And I could see that Mr. Dar did not really like Mr. Shaukat Tareen to be around. And you could say that he was pushed out within 3 or 4 months. because unless you are able to take those decisions, you don't want to be associated with the government just for some perks and privileges.
To be honest, and a lot of economists and experts and analysts are very wary and scared of the fact that this could be a dangerous scenario that is brewing, because I mean the facts are that among other obviously finance ministers who took the helm of affair, Mr. Isagda wasn't able to deliver previously, and even going forward, there are not much disruptive changes that are expected that can change the course of Pakistan's economic trajectory at least. But on that note, before we end, any positivities or optimism that you would like to share going forward?
I mean, many people say that the Pakistanis are very resilient people and they bounce back. They show their resilience every time they are put under such an extreme pressure. And I question this logic by questioning why do we have to put them under such a resilience every few years? They deserve something better than what has happened to them. And they are obviously awaiting for decades now that some of their dreams, some of their aspirations, especially the younger generation, which obviously consists of a majority of Pakistanis, and especially the urban educated middle class, the young graduates who have come out of universities and colleges and expect something better from the Pakistani leadership. I think we should be connected with them, at least be able to live up to some expectations. Like I say, whatever we do, and if we have good media managers to convince that, look, whatever has happened in the past is past. Uh, Tell us whether we are taking the right steps now or not. So every single step that we take, or we are forced to take to bring the economy and turn around the economy on a sustainable basis, not the way it has happened in the past. Few years of growth have always followed by a complete meltdown, whether it was 2008 or 2018 or 2022 or whatever. So I think we have a very imbalance. We go for growth, and then we build up the current account deficit, and we don't have the dollars to pay foreign obligations. And then we have to put the brakes on economic growth through uh, controlling our imports. That leads to slowdown of the economy to the level which leads to unemployment. And so you have to have a balance between the two. And there is no short-term solution. There's no short-term solution to it. That's why I say that we wasted those 2 years. Had this 5-year process, whichever party would have won the elections back in April 2022, rather than the vote of no confidence and followed by a 16-month rule, which meant neither here nor there. If we had gone for the elections, we would have gone through the tough 2 years. And now we would have been on the path to some semblance of recovery and some kind of benefits to the masses. But we have to start the process all over again now. And with a kind of fragmented parliament that we have, where no one is a clear winner as such. The formation of the government itself is difficult, and just to add this aspect that how difficult it is that Mr. Nawaz Sharif, who was considered to be the fourth time prime minister, he has withdrawn that because he had obviously made it very clear within the party that if he did not have the simple majority, he will not become the prime minister, because he will only like to become the prime minister if he's able to take those difficult, tough decisions without being blackmailed by coalition partners. And some of the other, the numbers are far short of the simple majority, so he's withdrawn as a possible candidate, and that just shows how difficult the situation is for anyone becoming the prime minister and then leading the government, a minority government, that too. How PPP and others behave during the initial months or a year or so, many people believe they would be, that's called blackmailing, but they could be genuinely opposing to some of the decisions, some of the major things like IMF, the terms and conditions of the IMF program, the budget that will be presented. and many other things that the new government will have to take. Obviously, they would try to remain populist at the expense of the ruling party.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. So
No, yeah.
unfortunately, nothing very good to communicate.
Yeah, no, actually, I think you've literally hit the nail in the head because that is exactly the crux of the problem. You mentioned no government is able to govern for the entire tenure of its elected period. We need that consistency. We need that time, we longevity in order to make those tough decisions and long-term reforms. And secondly, like you said, and initially where the discussion started was because it's such a weak coalition government. No prime minister like Mr. Nawaz Sharif will do because of the very same fact that no prime minister or premier is in a position to make those tough calls without being, intentionally or unintentionally being opposed by those who are part of that coalition government or even sitting in the opposition. So it's very obvious, I guess, that the road ahead is very tumultuous, very turbulent, and it's very risky to navigate through what is going likely to happen. But I hope that, for the sake of the country, that at least the people hope that whoever so is in power is able to deliver, in order to alleviate the problems, the challenges that the common man continues to suffer. So thank you so much, sir, for your
Thank
time.
you
It
so
was a
much for
very
inviting me.
insightful discussion.
Thanks.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.